ever heard something that completely changed your opinion? And imagine waking up one morning to discover that everything you say, everything you write, and everything you express is being monitored, censored, and controlled. Your opinions, your beliefs, and your very identity, everything is being silenced. And now imagine the opposite, a world where you can say everything you want. It doesn't matter how offensive, harmful, or false it can be, everything without restriction. A world where misinformation spreads unchecked, where words incite violence, and where reputations are destroyed instantly. Well, both scenarios sound alarming, don't they? And yet, somewhere between complete restriction and absolute freedom, we find ourselves today, facing with one of the most fundamental questions of our times. That is, should freedom of expression have limits? And if it does, who gets to decide where they are? And if it does, what can happen next? And let's start with a simple truth. Words shape our world. Throughout history, freedom of expression has been the driving force that led to many revolutions, social progress, and even innovations. Just think about all those great speeches that helped to shape today's world. Like, for example, Nelson Mandela's call for justice and Malala Yousafzai's fight for girls' education. None of these movements would have been possible without the ability to speak freely. But expression is not just about identity. It's about opinions, it's about what you really believe. It's about what we want to shape in our soon future. But with all of this, taking challenges that we call challenge injustice that promote conversation and then make us feel deeply in the future. And let's pause for a moment. What happens when this same power is misused? And let me ask you a question. Have you ever heard of something that completely changed your mind? For example, a conversation with a friend, a comment, or a tweet. And now, what if that information was completely false? For example, democratic societies have long recognized the necessity of having some limits in many aspects, like, for example, hate speech, defamation, and incitement to violence. The idea isn't to suppress voices, but to prevent harm in the future. But laws aren't the only ones shaping our future. Society plays a very important role too. Just think about online platforms, such as Instagram, YouTube, Facebook. All of them have something called guidelines. They have the power to remove content that can violate their policies and that can be harmful for future societies. And with this opening a very important question. Should private companies be the ones deciding what can and what cannot be said online? Or should that responsibility fall into governments? With all of this opening many other questions. And let's test something right now. Have you ever heard something that about private companies, like, for example, I don't know, raise your hand if you believe that private companies should be the one regulating harmful content online. Please raise your hand if you believe it. Okay, thank you. Now raise your hand if you believe the government should control it. Okay, now look around. Even among us, opinions can be different. And that's exactly the complexity of free speech, that it's never simple. And also, what about cancel culture? People who say something offensive, even decades ago, can be publicly criticized, boycotted, and even lose their careers. Opening another question. Is this accountability or is this suppression? The social consequences of free speech are just as powerful as legal ones. But freedom of expression is not the same everywhere. For example, in some countries, you can say almost everything you want without a restriction. Meanwhile, in other countries, criticizing the government can lead to imprisonment or even worse. For example, China and Russia, they have strict censorship laws that control what citizens say online and in public. Also, certain topics such as democracy movements are strictly banned and forbidden. Another example is in democratic societies where some restrictions also exist. For example, Germany bans Nazi symbols and some kind of speeches that can be harmful to prevent extremism. Meanwhile, in the USA, they protect almost all speeches, no matter how offensive or controversial it can be. They protect everything. And talking about this, both approaches have pros and cons. Because one tries to prevent the spread of dangerous ideologies, Meanwhile, the other one tries to support these kind of ideologies and to remain freedom of speech unrestricted. But neither of these two is perfect. Another example is Mexico, that it has recently added a new telecommunications reform that its main consequence is trying to provoke and to monitor everything that people say online and in public, like broadcasting and digital media. All of this aims to control and censor foreign propaganda and media content that can be harmful for Mexican people and even for the government. And this reform raises a very important question about free speech. When does monitoring become censorship? And how do we ensure that all of these laws that try to protect citizens don't end up silencing them instead? This is so controversial. So, retaking the initial question, does freedom of expression have limits? The truth is yes, it does. And it must have limits. Because while words can inspire and empower people, it can also cause deep harm. But the real question isn't whether we should have limits or not. It's who gets to decide, the government, societies, or corporations, or should that responsibility fall into us as individuals? We must protect speeches that fuels curiosity, that expresses creativity, and that challenge injustice. But we must also acknowledge that irresponsible speech can have very big consequences. Ultimately, the responsibility of free speech is ours. It's in how we act, how we react, how we listen, and how we choose to use our voices. Not just for ourselves, but for the world we want to have in a soon future. And as the novelist George Orwell said, freedom of expression is saying what people don't want to hear. Thank you.